These notes are to help you to understand the elements of science as a human endeavour, which is part of the SACE Stage 2 course. So really the key thing here is understanding that science isn't about what's on textbooks and websites and all of that information. That is the body of knowledge that's created by science and scientists, and that is done by people in their jobs, verifying, testing, checking, collaborating, communicating, in order to bring little bits of facts and evidence in together to that body of knowledge that is science. So in order to really, I guess, bring that home, here's a little class photo, I guess, of the lab that I worked in when I was in Sweden. That's me down there as a visiting Australian with my son, who's now learning to drive. So I guess this was a while back. And this is obviously a collaborative effort across multiple people working in that laboratory. Here's Peter Eriksson, who is the lab head. Jonas, one of my good friends at the time. We've got some Australians here. So the three of us are Australians. We've got a New Zealander, mostly Swedes. This young researcher's French, and so it really is an international collaboration of people working together. And for us, particularly, that was around stem cells and understanding their biology. So all science is done like this, through teams of people working together, conducting experiments, hypothesizing uh, ideas about how that might work, and then testing those out to see if that's true, and then obviously publishing and communicating our findings in order to add to that knowledge. So what really is science then? So this is one definition that I like to work with. So it's a system for developing our understanding of ourselves and our universe. So really what we're trying to look at is understanding and predicting the way the universe works, the way our bodies work, in order to really provide benefits for mankind in terms of, medicines or solutions or new economic opportunities. But it's really about that understanding as the key point. The other key point being that systematic approach to it. So there are lots of different ways. So philosophy and religion and other things that are seeking understanding. Science does that in a particular way. And so what are those processes? What is the way in which science works, and how has it been so useful and so reliable throughout the history of science? So one of the key things is it's always based on evidence or the interpretation of evidence. So we need to collect data, information, evidence, and then interpret that. Evidence is used to construct hypotheses, models, theories, and laws. So the difference between those four things is really about that level of evidence that you have. So a hypothesis being a prediction about the relationship between things that might be based on some initial evidence. As you develop more and more evidence, you can start to build models and theories. And so in biology, we tend to get that level of theory. So the evolutionary theory is based on a whole lot of hypotheses which have had evidence that has supported them. Build that all together and you can have the theory of evolution by natural selection. Laws tend to be part of science only really in physics, where its evidence is always so strong and able to be uh, tested experimentally that we have laws of physics, but there are also theories in physics, obviously in cosmology and quantum physics. So those are the levels that we get to. Even laws are not considered absolute truth, though. So all of these are subject to change based on new evidence. So when new evidence arises and is verified, then it's the hypothesis, model, theory, or law that has to change in order to fit and accommodate that evidence. And finally, in order to make sure we can trust this evidence, science uses agreed methodologies for the collection. Sorry, I'm covering up that a bit. Communication of evidence. So the ways in which evidence is collected and the manner in which it's communicated, so we can trust what's out there in the scientific library of understanding, is done through agreed methods. In terms of SACE then, those elements of the way in which science works come under this category of SHE, science as a human endeavour. And there's really four elements in that. You need to know and understand and remember these. So they are communication and collaboration, development, influence, and application and limitation. Now, many students may have done SHE tasks in the past and had an understanding of these four based on their titles. What I'm going to go through step by step is actually the breakdown of those and the sub-elements of them in order to really understand them And I'm going to stress now, and when we get to it, that development is probably the least well understood and the most misinterpreted of these. So let's go through and have a look at each of these elements and how they work. So communication and collaboration has two sub-elements to it. Science is a global enterprise that relies on clear communication, international conventions, review and verification of results. So this is really about the scientific literature and the way it's developed and published. So really, from its early foundings, and the picture there is one of Isaac Newton's collections of letters. So letters were the initial way of, I guess, communicating science in a written down way. Um, those have really evolved into published papers, which now are much more stringent, obviously, than sending letters between learned colleagues. They're a published way of expressing and communicating your results, and they have conventions around them, and there are international conventions as to the titles that we use in our prac reports and investigations mirror those that are the conventions used in international scientific communication. Not only that, but before they're published, they're peer reviewed and the results can be verified, and that anything where the results are not verified is either not published or is not or is retracted after publication. So there are rules about how that's communicated and who can publish scientific information that is verifiable and trusted. Obviously, the other key thing is that the idea of collaboration. So I showed my lab in Sweden with the scientists across multiple countries collaborating together. Our lab obviously then collaborated with other labs in Sweden and around the world, and also with government agencies. And a lot of funding, especially for Australian scientists, comes from government agencies and taxpayer money. And so the scientific enterprise is really held together through a whole lot of collaboration and support between different agencies and groups and industry as well. So what would that actually look like when you're analysing some sort of article or publication to look for the communication and collaboration elements in there? So earlier last term, when we were doing our biotechnology, we looked at some articles that I said would be useful when we're looking at the SHE topic. So here's Article 2, which we looked at there about gene therapy. And so, for instance, in that initial paragraph of that, we can see an international team of scientists have developed an experimental gene therapy. So there, straight away, we see evidence of collaboration within the science that's being reported here. The other thing that then goes into the next paragraph is that they describe that in a paper that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So this journal, again, is showing that there is a verifiable result there that has been through a peer-reviewed process, so we can trust that communication. So there's examples that you can pull out of collaboration and communication happening. The next one is about development. As I said, this one's fairly misunderstood. It is not about the development of technology. It is about the development of scientific hypotheses, models, theories, and laws. So when we talked about those at the start, this is the development that we're talking about. It does say new technologies in here, but we'll get to that in a minute. That's about new technologies that promote better data collection and analysis, not about application of technology. So development is about the development of complex scientific models and theories, often requires a wide range of evidence from many sources, and that new technologies improve the efficiency of scientific procedures and data collection. So technologies that improve your methods or your data collection can reveal new evidence, allowing you to modify or replace models, theories, and processes. This picture is here because this is the theory of plate tectonics, came about through evidence from a lot of different sources. One being here, where volcanoes and earthquakes appear, giving the idea of plate boundaries in one area of science, but in another area of science in terms of fossils, fossils that were found in South America and Africa showed that those two continents were perhaps joined because there were species, fossils of species that are on this part of South America and this part of Africa that were similar, suggesting that these two continents were once together. So both from fossil records and from geological activity, the theory of plate tectonics could be developed. So development of a theory, not development of a technology. Example of that here is an article looking at rethinking the origins of complex life, in which says the timeline for complex animal life been shifted 100 million years closer. So one technology that was being used were molecular markers, of molecules that were thought to only be able to be made by animal life. Some of that evidence through better technology has been overturned and showing that instead of being as old as they thought they were, now the oldest animals on Earth are Dickinsonia, which is one of those organisms I talked about from South Australia, fossils that we have from 558 million years ago from the Ediacaran Hills in the Flinders Ranges. So new evidence, new technology, a better way of looking at the molecules of early life meant that we then changed our theory about when complex animal life came along. So again, it's about the development of theories using new technology rather than the development of technology for applications. When we talk about technological applications, that's applications and limitations coming up next, or the one after. Influence. So influence is about how advances in scientific understanding in one field can influence and be influenced by other areas of science, technology, engineering, and maths. I would put in there as well medicine. So very often in our biology context, we're talking about how understanding of biology can affect medicine. And the acceptance and use of scientific knowledge can be influenced by social, economic, cultural, ethical considerations. The example I'm going to show is about economic, but just be aware of all of these, and often the ethical considerations come into science, especially when we're talking about things like IVF, like we have here. So the example here is about those chickens that were modified to produce human proteins in their eggs. So our scientific understanding of the biology of goats, rabbits, chickens, and that their production of milk and eggs is being used and influencing another area of therefore of medicine, and also our understanding of proteins and the way they work, so that the protein-based drugs and antibody therapies are able to be developed using this technology. One of the things that makes the use of these proteins or the production of these proteins through eggs as a viable idea is that it's more cost effective than other production methods, and mammalian cell culture techniques are expensive and have low yields. So here we have an understanding from one area of science, reproductive biology, supporting medicine and protein production, and also that being influenced by the economic considerations about what's the most cost effective way to produce these drugs. And finally, we have application and limitation. Now, this one's used very often across a whole lot of areas and is probably the most commonly used one. It has 3 subpoints. So if you're going to link your SHE report to this, make sure you're covering all 3. So scientific knowledge and understanding can allow scientists to develop solutions, make discoveries, design action for sustainability, or evaluate a whole lot of impacts and make reliable predictions. So science is applied in all these different areas. Use of scientific knowledge can be beneficial or have unexpected consequences, and this requires monitoring, assessment, and evaluation of risk. In the example I talk about with vaccination, clearly that's a key thing, that evaluation of risk. What is the benefit versus risk analysis? And that science informs public debate and is informed by public debate. So again, those limitations about what data we have or what conclusions we can draw often come into this public debate sphere. Again, Australia's vaccination is a really key example. So let's have a little bit of a look at how that plays out. So in this article about the RNA vaccine, which was actually published back in May, which was before, I guess, a whole lot of the blood clotting stuff came out. What we had here is that Australia had a lot riding on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And so that was the main way in which most Australians were going to be vaccinated. As we've seen, there's been some problems around that. So this really plays into the unexpected consequences side of things that was referred to in the SHE element. The other thing we have here is an application of a technology to provide a solution then. So the RNA production technique, which is different to AstraZeneca, allows you to create RNA using microbial cells and plasmid DNA. And so again, we see how the application of our technology using plasmids and enzymes can allow a solution for a new type of vaccine. Getting back to the influence and the how society's things are going to influence science and technology, we see here that in order for that actually to be possible to use this RNA vaccine, the particular facility in Adelaide the Biocina facility would need to be reconfigured, and that we'd need to have licensing technology from Pfizer.